Next item on today's calendar is item number 17 by Senator Miller, Senate Bill 568 Sub A, and Act relating to food and drugs, cannabis authorization, regulation, and taxation. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, today I stand before you to move a piece of legislation that is more than a decade in the making. In 2010, I chaired a commission examining our failed cannabis policy. This was a special Senate commission to study the prohibition of marijuana that was completed in March of 2010. The committee members were Leo Blaze, Paul Jabor, John Grasso, Dr. David Lewis, Glenn Lowry, Dr. Jeffrey Myron, Joe Moran, Donna Palacastro, Joseph Osidias, Jerome Smith, Nancy St. Germain, and it was written and policy authored also by Stephen Iannazzi, a name many of you might recognize, and Kelly Mahoney. It is a historic day as it is the first time a bill to legalize and regulate cannabis has reached the floor of either legislative chamber in Rhode Island. I want to thank you, Mr. President, and especially want to thank the Majority Leader McCaffrey for working with me to make this happen. I would also like to thank Chief of Staff Jake Basalian, President Ruggiero, Whip Goodwin, Nicole Verdi, Kate Revin, Senator Coyne, Kristen Sylvia, Stephen Hayes, Kelly Oates, as I forced her to make about 100 pages of copies about 10 times in a row, and all the senators pro or con, as the feedback was serious and constructive from all of you. We have arrived at this point about 10 years later than I would have liked, and it is important that we act expeditiously to enact a regulatory framework. Cannabis will be legal in Connecticut next week, signed today, I believe, with a calendar of having stores open by next May, a year from now. And Massachusetts opened their first cannabis shops in 2018, some of them just steps from the Rhode Island border. The longer we wait, the more we put Rhode Island's eventual cannabis retailers at a disadvantage. The longer we wait, the more Rhode Island customers are getting into the habit of traveling to a nearby shop over the border, and the more they are building relationships with those companies. And with cannabis so readily available, whether on the black market or legally in neighboring states, Rhode Island must address all of the societal ills, but we will lack the regulatory framework and revenue stream. This legislation is therefore urgently needed. The bill before us creates a comprehensive tax and regulatory structure that legalizes cannabis in the state of Rhode Island for adults over the age of 21. Adults can possess under 1 ounce of cannabis and home grow up to 12 plants, 6 active at any one time. Consumption would be prohibited in public places, and unsealed containers would be prohibited from passenger areas of a motor vehicle. The legislation creates a Cannabis Control Commission to oversee a competitive and accessible licensing structure that would generate tax revenue through the regular 7% sales tax, a special 10% cannabis tax, and a 3% local sales tax, which is returned to the municipality where the point of sale occurred. The 20% total tax is the same structure as Massachusetts. The commission would be a 5-member full-time board tasked with overseeing the licensing of 4 aspects of cannabis supply chain: cultivation, manufacturing, retail, and testing. To prevent monopolization of the new market, no business entity would be allowed to possess more than 1 license, although an individual can invest in more than 1 entity. We sought to create a vibrant, competitive marketplace not dominated by a few big entities, but open to all, including those who wish to organize as the workers' co-op. The sub-A retailers would be capped at 1 license per 20,000 rather than the 10,000 of the previous version. But every community would be eligible for at least three retail licenses. Any municipality can opt out if they choose. Communities can also pass local ordinance to regulate the time, place, and manner cannabis operators. However, local communities cannot impose any additional fees or contingencies. To address concerns raised during the committee process, we added a moratorium on new cultivators' licenses until July 1 of 2023. The legislation includes an expedited expungement process for those with misdemeanor marijuana records. The legislation also creates the Cannabis Equity Fund to provide technical and grant assistance to qualified individuals. In the development of this bill, we wanted to ensure as many Rhode Islanders as possible have an opportunity to participate in this new economy. That is why we set low barriers to entry with accessible tiered licensing fees. Licensing fees range from as low as $100 for a small cultivator license, $5,000 for a manufacturer's testing entity, and up to $20,000 for the largest cultivators and retailers. It is also why the bill creates a cannabis equity fund to help individuals who have been directly and indirectly impacted by our past policy of prohibition. 1/3 of the licenses would be reserved for individuals from these impacted communities. And with that explanation, I move passage.
Is there a second? Senator Goodwin, Chacon, Sosnowski, Bell, Murray, Coyne, DeMario, Acosta, Coleman, Mack. Senator Miller moves. It's been seconded. All those in favor? No. Oh, I see it. It's Senator Bell.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Thank you, Chairman Miller and Leader McCaffrey, for all of your work on this legislation. This is a historic day. It has been many, many, many years in the making to get us here, and I want to recognize all the activists who've worked so hard to get us to this point. You know, I think it's also important to recognize not just a historic step in moving forwards with this incredibly important legislation, but this bill specifically, I think, has a lot of really important improvements that were made to it that I think we need to recognize. I think I'm very happy about the language that was put in to address some of the problems in the Controlled Substances Act and move that out. I think that is going to have an incredibly important impact and really help get us towards true legalization. I think it's really important that we fight to preserve that language in any final negotiations with the House. We've made a lot of really important improvements in this bill that I think really need to be in the final bill. I think this is the best legalization bill we've seen in a long time. I think it's the best of any of the versions that we've ever had, House, Senate, or Governor. And so there are really important provisions that we have to fight to keep. That being said, I do think there are a couple of things that the House bill does right that we might be able to modify. I think we should make expungement automatic. And I think the tiering structure here is set up in such a way that it allows certain larger cultivators to potentially dominate the market. It's something I hope that we can tweak. But that being said, I think it's a really excellent piece of legislation. I'm really happy that we're moving forwards with this, and I think the work that was done to get the details of this right is important, and it's going to pay dividends when we actually make this into public policy. So with that, I'm really thrilled to second this, and I hope that we pass this and are able to get this into law this year.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Senator Rogers.
Thank you for the opportunity. I agree with Mr. Bell. Senator Bell, this bill has come a long way, but there are a few shortfalls. One small to me, but one kind of large that I kind of mentioned to a few people that didn't make it. The shortfall one is we are giving 3% to the dispensaries that sell it back to the towns that host them. And I had brought up in committee that there's two parts to that. There's the growers and the dispensers. And I think the growers were left outside of that. Some of the local communities may not have a dispensary, but they may have a growing facility. And that comes with certain things also in the community that it would also be helpful to send some of that money to the growers in the communities where the stuff is being grown. But my big shortfall on this, and if this doesn't pass by both sides and is rectified, hopefully we will pick up the point that I'm going to make next. I kind of went to a few people that are involved with this over the few years, and one of the first things I brought to them is says, tell me what you think would make this better. And one of it is, and I had to agree with them, was we have the growers. We are putting a commission together to oversee it, but what I would like to see codified in the law, in the bill, is what would be a distribution center. Now, you have the growers, you have the dispensaries. As this is set up, it's going to travel in that course. I really do think that we should have a central distribution facility that accepts from the growers and then dispenses to the dispensaries for checks and balances on many levels. Let's say something happens with a fungus or something that's growing, it's a public health issue. You have a central place to find out where it's coming. If it's coming from growers shooting off the dispensaries, it's kind of erratic. But if you have a central central distribution hub where this can be followed and have control and testing, and the same thing goes for the tax overview, where we have revenue going in different directions, you may have people sneaking around trying to circumvent things. If you have a central distribution center, you have a place to go and checks and balances from the growers to the dispensaries. It simplifies it, it makes it easier, and it keeps everybody honest. I think that should have been part of the component of this. I do agree with it. I'm not against it, but I do believe it could be made better for public health issues, for taxation coverage issues, and other things. So I will be voting against it, and if it fails, hopefully we can come together as two groups and possibly address that, and then I would wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rogers.
President Gallo, can I just make a quick response to that?
Certainly, Senator Miller.
We did have some feedback that did include that, and one of the reasons we didn't go to the concept of a central distribution is because of what we observed as we went to look at operations in retailers in Massachusetts, and some of them actually only use maybe one or two cultivators. And so the central distribution would just be another security component that would be a burden both to the cultivator and the security and the tagging and the tracking that you want to go through with the marijuana.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Senator Rogers for a second time.
Thank you. A controlled substance, I think, should have this oversight. If it costs a little bit more, I think it's important for public health safety issues. So it may be a burden on the small ones, but I believe the state of California uses this, if I'm not wrong, and it seems to work pretty good. So I really would not like this to be washed off. I'd really like to see it have some consideration if it does fail this year or we address it later. I have my concerns, and I think it's an important point. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rogers. There are no further lights. The act has been moved and seconded. Clerk, unlock the machine. Has every senator voted? Senator Goodwin? Okay. Thank you. Clerk, please lock the machine. The act passes. There are 29 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative.